It arrived on a Tuesday. I was 27, living in San Francisco, my life finally feeling like my own. I was a respected sommelier, a wine critic. Then the email landed. It was from my mother, Laura. The subject line was a sterile punch to the gut, decision on family legacy. My hands felt cold. I clicked it open. The words were few, but they were precise. Carlyn, after careful discussion with your father and Jordan, we have made a decision. You have chosen your path as a critic. You are no longer part of the vineyard's future. Attached was a single PDF, a legal notice, formally disinheriting me from the land, just like that. Before we go any further, have you ever felt like the outsider in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. I read the email twice. The old me would have cried. She would have called, begging for an explanation, asking what she did wrong. But the woman reading that email just felt a strange, cold, calm settle over her. The grief was there, but it was being eclipsed by a clinical clarity. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text my father. I set my phone down, opened my laptop, and got to work. My fingers moved quickly. First, an email to my editor at Wine Spectator, Arthur. I wrote, regarding the upcoming feature on the Napa Valley Innovators, I must formally retract my review of the new Monroe Reserve. An irreconcilable conflict of interest has arisen. Please pull the 10-point score. I hit send. That score alone would have been worth millions to them. The centerpiece of my stepbrother Jordan's new modern marketing campaign. Second, a call to the events manager at a private, members-only club in San Francisco. Hi, David. It's Carlyn. About that launch party I'm hosting for Monroe Vineyards next month? Yes. The big one. I'm afraid I have to cancel it. My involvement, that is, he sounded panicked. Carlyn, what? The press is confirmed. The guest list. Your name is the only reason half these people are coming. I know, I said, my voice even, and I am deeply sorry to put you in this position. But the event cannot proceed with my endorsement. A personal family matter. You'll have to speak to my father, Brian, about the cancellation fees. I hung up before he could argue. I had just used my professional reputation, the very thing they despised me for, to dismantle the two pillars of their entire sales year. It wasn't emotional. It was a transaction. They had made a withdrawal. I was simply balancing the books to understand what they did. You have to understand how my family works. That email wasn't just a legal document. It was an insult. It was their way of saying, you are only valuable to us as long as you serve us. They called me the critic. They said it with a sneer, like I had abandoned them to go write little notes in a book. But they conveniently forgot that for the last 5 years, I was their silent marketer. I was the one who got our obscure bottles into the hands of the right people in San Francisco. I was the one whose 10-point reviews were quoted in their marketing brochures. I was the one who built the reputation they were all cashing in on. And I remembered clearly, 10 years ago, when a late frost nearly bankrupted the entire vineyard. My father, Brian, was panicking. My mother, Laura, was in tears. And my grandmother, Genevieve, that ghost matriarch, I didn't write them a check. She wrote me one. This is a loan. Carlyn, she'd said, her eyes sharp. Not for him. For you. Save the land. I did. I was just 19. But I used that money to rally the workers. To save the season's crop, I paid that loan back to her. With interest. Within 3 years. My family, on the other hand, saw my success as a threat. I had built a life and a name entirely separate from them. I didn't need the vineyard. And in their world, need is the same thing as control. My independence wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a liability. It was the reason, in their cold, transactional minds, that I was the one who could be cut. They had used my reputation to build their empire, and now they were using my career as the justification to erase me from it. The earthquake didn't take long. My phone, which I had placed face down on my desk, began to vibrate, not just a single buzz, but a frantic, angry rhythm. I picked it up. The screen was a storm. The first message was from my stepbrother, Jordan. He was 36, and he'd spent every one of those years believing the world owed him everything, especially the vineyard. His text was exactly what I expected. "What the hell did you do, wine spectator? Just called my father. Are you really so jealous that you'd try to sabotage us? This is pathetic. Even for you." Jealous. That was his go-to word for me. He couldn't imagine that I had built my own career. He could only see it as a pale imitation of the legacy he was given. He wasn't shocked that they had betrayed me. He was shocked that I had finally done something about it. I didn't reply. I just archived the message. The next notification was an email. My mother, Laura. Her tone was different. Not angry, like Jordan. Worse. It was the cold, sharp disappointment of a director whose lead actress had just walked off stage. "Carlyn." It read, "You have deeply embarrassed your father. Whatever point you think you are making, it is childish. You are creating a mess. You need to call Arthur at the magazine and fix this immediately." Not "let's talk." Not "are you okay?" It was a command. Fix this. She saw the entire situation not as a betrayal, but as a public relations problem that I, the ungrateful daughter, had created. But the final blow, the one that really solidified the coldness in my chest, came an hour later. It was a notification from Instagram. Jordan's wife, Morgan. She was the perfect social media trophy, documenting their perfect Napa life, from new oak barrels to new babies. She had posted a story, a beautifully filtered photo of the vineyard at sunset, the light hitting the chateau just right. And over it, in the words, "It's so sad to see someone trying to destroy what other people spend their lives building, but true legacy always endures. Number, Napa legacy. Number, family first. Number, blessed." They weren't sorry. They were doubling down. They were painting me as the villain, the jealous outsider trying to tear down their beautiful, perfect life. I looked at the post, at the hashtags, at the performative victimhood, and I understood. They had no remorse. They were escalating. And so was I. This was no longer a family drama. This was war. And I wasn't about to bring a small claims lawyer to a war my grandmother had clearly prepared for. I booked a flight that night. Not to Napa, to Geneva. I didn't call my parents. I didn't answer the increasingly frantic texts from Jordan. I flew 12 hours over an ocean. My mind, a cold, quiet place. I was moving on an instinct I didn't know I possessed. A pull toward the only person my grandmother, Genevieve, had ever truly trusted with her affairs. A man I had only met twice, at her funeral and at my 21st birthday. Mr. Fournier. His office was not like the glass towers of San Francisco. It was on a quiet, stone-paved street, in a building that had probably stood for 300 years. The air inside was different. It smelled of old wood, leather, and something I couldn't place. The smell of real money. The kind of wealth that doesn't need to post about itself on Instagram. It was a fortress of silence and power. A world away from the sterile, look at me chateau my father had built in Napa. Mr. Fournier was older, with eyes that had seen everything and judged most of it. He didn't greet me with pity. He greeted me with a solemn respect, as if I were a queen arriving for a coronation. I didn't know I was scheduled for Miss Carlyn, he said, his voice a soft, precise European accent. Thank you for coming. I have been expecting this call, though I had hoped it would never be necessary. Your grandmother. She was a very wise, very strategic woman. I sat across from his massive, uncluttered desk. I didn't speak. I just pushed the PDF my mother had emailed me across the polished wood. He glanced at it. A flicker of something not surprise, but distaste in his eyes. Ah. Yes. This? He then looked up at me. This legal notice. It is nothing, Miss Carlyn. It is the desperate act of people who have just locked themselves in a vault and are trying to pick the lock from the inside. They do not realize the door only opens from the outside. And you, he added, are the only one with the key. My heart hammered. What did they do? What they tried to do? He corrected gently. He turned his monitor toward me. Your family, led by your father and your stepbrother, made an attempt to gain full control of the Vineyard Holding Company. They assumed, incorrectly, that, with your grandmother gone, the assets were theirs for the taking. He pulled up a file, scanned documents, requests for liquidation, and at the bottom, a signature, Genevieve Monroe. Except it wasn't. It was a clumsy, amateurish forgery. They have been very busy since the funeral. Mr. Fournier said, his voice laced with ice. They believed they could use this fraudulent power of attorney to begin liquidating the less visible assets. Specifically, they attempted to authorize the sale of the founder's cellar. I gasped. The founder's cellar. It wasn't just wine. It was a priceless, irreplaceable collection of my grandmother's first, most experimental bottles. It was her soul. It was the one thing she had put in her will that could never be sold. It was the heart of the entire legacy. They needed capital. Mr. Fournier explained. For Mr. Jordan's rather ambitious expansion plans. They were trying to sell the heart of the vineyard, to fund a new tasting room. But they couldn't. Could they? No, they could not. A very small, very thin smile touched Mr. Fournier's lips, because the founder's cellar was never just a collection of wine. Miss Carlyn, it was the bait. And your family, I'm afraid, has just taken it. That's not even the main point. Miss Carlyn, Mr. Fournier said, leaning forward, the founder's cellar was merely the trigger. The real trap is the company itself. He brought up a complex corporate chart. At the top was a name I didn't recognize, Genevieve Holdings, LLC. And branching down from it was everything. The land in Napa, the brand, the distribution network, even the chateau my father was so proud of. Your family, Mr. Fournier said, pointing to a small box on the side, controls 49% of the voting shares. They have been allowed to run the company, to feel as if they owned it, but they never did. My breath caught. Who owns the rest? Mr. Fournier looked at me. His expression unreadable. Your grandmother retained 51%. An absolute controlling interest. An interest which, upon her passing, transferred entirely and irrevocably to you. I stared at the screen. Speechless. I wasn't just an heir to a piece of land. I was the owner. I owned the entire company. I owned them. They cannot sell what they do not own. Miss Carlyn, and by submitting those fraudulent documents, they have not only failed, they have triggered a system-wide audit and an immediate freeze on all corporate assets and credit lines. pending a review by the new majority shareholder. You. As he said the words credit lines, a vibration started on the desk. My phone, which had been silent for my entire flight, suddenly came to life. It was a storm. A cascade of notifications so fast I could barely read them. I turned it over. The screen was a frantic mess of green and blue bubbles. A text from Jordan, "What did you do? My corporate cards are all frozen. The bank just called in our business loans. What the hell did you do?" Another from my mother. "Laura." This one was all caps. "Frantic. Carlyn. I am at the Napa auction. I was bidding on the Henderson lot. The card was declined. $35,000. Carlyn. Declined. In front of everyone. Call me now." I looked at the messages. The panic. The confusion. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement, turning to terror. I looked up at Mr. Winnie. In Fournier. My heart hammering, not with fear, but with a kind of terrible, profound awe. She planned for this. "But why?" I whispered. The question finally bubbling up. Why let it get this bad? Why let him? Why let my father to become this? Why wait? Mr. Fournier's expression softened. This was the part that wasn't about numbers. "Your grandmother," he said quietly, "was a patient strategist. She was also a mother. She spent 20 years watching her son, your father, become a man she did not recognize. Influenced by your mother's ambition and his own weakness, she hoped he would choose the right path. She gave him every chance to prove her wrong. But she was not a fool. She knew hope was not a legal strategy." He gestured to the screen. This trap. This was her last resort. It was her painful admission that her son might, one day, choose greed over blood. But she designed it so it could only be triggered by an undeniable criminal act of betrayal, like forging her name to sell her legacy. He looked at me, and I finally understood. She did it to protect you, Carlyn. Not just your inheritance. She did it to protect you from a lifetime of doubt. She waited so that when this day came, you would never have to wonder if you were the one who was wrong. You would have the proof. I looked down at the frantic, accusing texts from the family that thought they had just disowned me. They had no idea. They were the ones who were disowned. They were the ones who had been cut out long ago by a woman who had seen this day coming and had built an ark for me. And me alone. I flew back to Napa the next day. I didn't go to the chateau. Not at first. I had Mr. Fournier arrange it. An emergency shareholder meeting. A summons they could not legally ignore. I waited in the main boardroom. A room I had been in 1,000 times for holiday dinners and family announcements. It was a cold, opulent room. All dark wood and high ceilings. Designed to impress, to intimidate. On the far wall was a massive portrait of my grandmother, Genevieve. Her eyes seeming to watch everything. They shuffled in, not as a powerful family, but as a broken, frightened herd. My father, Brian. His face pale. His suit hanging on him. My mother, Laura. Her usual perfect composure, completely shattered. Her eyes red and puffy. My stepmother, Michelle. And Jordan's wife, Morgan. Huddled behind them, looking terrified. And then there was Jordan. The smug, arrogant smirk he had worn his entire life was gone. Wiped clean. Replaced by a hollow, sullen look of absolute defeat. They stood by the door, hesitating, as if afraid to enter the room that had, until yesterday, been the center of their universe. I didn't stand up. I sat at the head of the table, my grandmother's chair. The seat of power. I gestured to the chairs opposite me. Please, I said, my voice quiet. Sit down. They sat. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. They were waiting for me to scream, to cry, to accuse them. I would give them none of it. Emotion was a currency they no longer deserved from me. I let the silence stretch, watching them fidget. Finally, I placed a thin folder on the polished wood between us. Let's talk about fraud, I said. My father flinched. Carlyn, sweetheart. We can explain. Explain what I cut him off. My voice, like ice. The forged power of attorney you filed 2 weeks after Grandma's funeral, or the fraudulent attempt to sell the founder's cellar. Which part would you like to explain first? Dad, I slid the first document out. This is the forgery. Jordan, our handwriting expert said it was a clumsy attempt. You always were impatient. Jordan's face went white. I slid out the next out. And this? This is the holding company's charter. The one that names me, as of this morning, the 51% controlling shareholder of everything. The land, the house, the company, the brand. I leaned forward. And you, all of you, are perpetrators of felony, wire fraud, and conspiracy. My mother finally broke. What? What are you going to do? She whispered. I've discussed it with my lawyers. I said, and we have 2 options for you. 1, I hand this folder to the district attorney. You will all be prosecuted. You will face prison time. The name you're so proud of will be dragged through the mud for a generation. You will lose everything. I held up a second finger. Option 2. You sign these. I placed a second, thicker stack of papers on the table. Full. Detailed confessions. Your immediate resignation. Dad. Your permanent removal from the board. Jordan. You will sign away any and all claims to any family assets. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement so binding you will never speak of this to anyone. In exchange, I will not press charges. I will provide a modest yearly allowance, enough to live on, quietly, and without luxury. You will disappear. The choice is prison or exile. My father didn't even read the papers. He just reached for the pen, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He signed, one by one. They followed. Jordan, his jaw tight with rage, slashed his name on the page. Laura and Michelle signed with silent, streaming tears. It was the sound of an empire turning to ash. When it was done, an assistant I had hired came in and quietly collected the folder. It was over. They stood up, ghosts, in their own home, and walked to the door. I watched them go. I was alone in the chateau. I stood there for a long time. The silence deafening. The pain of their betrayal was still there. A sharp ache in my chest. You see, cutting ties with toxic family isn't a clean break. It's an amputation. You can't just walk away. You have to grieve the part of yourself you're leaving behind. The part that, despite everything, still wished they were the family you deserved. It's a painful, necessary surgery, but it's the only way to stop the sickness from spreading, to save what's left of you. 6 months passed. The chateau was no longer a cold museum. It was breathing again. That afternoon, I sat in the boardroom, at that same table, but this time, the papers in front of me were different. I was signing the incorporation documents for the Genevieve Foundation. My family's greed was built on the idea of taking my grandmother's justice. Her true legacy was about building. Their betrayal wouldn't be the end of the story. It would be the seed. I was taking the assets they tried to steal and transforming them into scholarships. Grants for young, ambitious women in the wine industry who had the talent, but not the connections Women like me. Later that day, I walked through the vineyards. The vines were heavy, with new grapes, and I wasn't alone. I was with the first group of scholarship students. 3 young women, their faces bright with excitement. I watched them taste a grape, their eyes lighting up. I smiled, a real smile. The war was over. I wasn't just the owner, I was the planter, and that was a legacy worth fighting for.